I had the displeasure of seeing this movie and I have some thoughts about it. Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights with Jacob Elordi and Margot Robbie is one of those movies where the quotations around the title are doing just obscene amounts of heavy lifting. It technically borrows from Emily Bronte's Pot Skeleton, Two Children on the Moors, obsessive love, class barriers, Heathcliff disappears and he comes back rich and angry, Catherine dies in childbirth, and then it tosses out almost everything that makes the book what it is. The entire second half of the book is just gone. The generational structure is gone. The anger is sanded down, politics is stripped. What is left is essentially doomed lovers and pretty lighting, sex scenes, and Charlie XCX. I'm not a purist about adaptations. I think demanding 100% fidelity is silly and creatively bankrupt. Film isn't literature. Translation requires change, but there is a difference between interpretation and misreading. This feels like a fundamental misunderstanding of what Wuthering Heights even is. It takes one of the most psychologically brutal, socially charged, structurally weird novels and turns it into something that plays like a Netflix romance. And not even a good one. For anyone that hasn't read it, the novel isn't really a love story. It's a nested, multi-generational narrative about abuse and inheritance and class resentment and racial othering and the way violence reproduces itself across families. Heathcliff is not a Byronic heartthrob. He is vindictive and manipulative and often monstrous. Kathy is also not some soft, tragic heroine. She's proud and selfish and complicit in her own misery. The second generation exists to show how trauma echoes and resolves. The book is ugly and claustrophobic on purpose, and the film cuts all of that. Fennell ends the story with Catherine dying in childbirth. No daughter, no structural mirroring, no slow reckoning with what Heathcliff has done. There is no aftermath, there is just tragedy as like an aesthetic end point, and then it fades out. Which tells you exactly what kind of movie this is trying to be. The film starts with Cathy and Heathcliff as inseparable kids, and then society intrudes, and Catherine chooses Edgar because wealth and status matter. Heathcliff disappears, and then he comes back rich, and their reunion spirals into jealousy and destruction. That's basically it. The rest is montage and sex and shouting on cliffs. The novel's complications like race and class mobility, calculated revenge and inherited property, generational damage are treated like optional side quests that the movie just does not pick up. And even if you ignore the book entirely, it's still not a particularly interesting movie. The biggest issue is that Fennell seems to read Heathcliff and Cathy as straightforward tragic soulmates, which is the most surface level book talk like dark romance mafia boss interpretation you could possibly have. Heathcliff becomes this soppy, wounded lover instead of the deliberate, strategic, terrifying figure he is in the book. Novel Heathcliff ruins lives on purpose. Movie Heathcliff mostly just like stares and broods and he has sex. And Charlie XCX is there. He's sad. That's kind of it. Catherine, meanwhile, loses herself. In the book, her refusal to marry him is devastating because it's driven by pride and social ambition and cruelty. Here, their relationship is romantic almost immediately. So the tension collapses. If they're already framed as pure and meant to be, then what's the conflict besides circumstance? You can't build a tragedy if you sand off the character's worst instincts. The movie constantly tries to shock you into feeling something. There's a very early hanging scene that feels like it exists purely to show you just how edgy they're gonna be. A lot of moments gesture towards transgression like sex and violence and taboo, but nothing actually lands because none of it is grounded in character or stakes. It wants to be like freaky and erotic and gothic, but it never commits. It's constantly flirting with excess and then backing away. Despite all the weird sex stuff, it's so safe. There's also the issue that is impossible to ignore. The novel's racial and class politics get completely just thrown out. Heathcliff's ambiguous, radicalized otherness is central to the text. He's described in explicitly foreign and unsettling terms. His outsider status is weaponized against him and informs how he moves through the world. It's uncomfortable and messy and historically loaded. Casting Jacob Elordi and then trying to signal otherness by giving him a beard and making him a bit dirty fundamentally dodges the point. They want the aesthetic of marginalization without the reality of it, like the romance without the politics. At one point, he comes back clean with a haircut and a little gay earring, and it drove me up the wall. It's such a shallow visual shorthand. Like, oh, here is his transformation. He's hot now. What a load of bullshit. Elordi isn't a terrible actor. Fennell's one genuine talent might be making him feel like a person instead of the walking red flag he plays on Euphoria. I thought for years that he himself was a dickhead because of the character that he played. He and Margot Robbie clearly have chemistry outside of the movie as well. And some of the sex scenes work on a purely physical level, but the performance itself is flat. He doesn't get to be calculating or cruel or frightening, which are the interesting parts of Heathcliff. He mostly just kind of is there. It's wild too, because he was really good in Frankenstein, like miles better. He was complex and he was genuinely affecting. This feels like a step back. Maybe he knew that Wuthering Heights wasn't it, so he had to like lock Frankenstein in so people would forget about this absolute shit show. Margot Robbie is there. She's present. Catherine is written so thinly that there's only so much she could possibly do. Catherine should be volatile and contradictory and hard to like, and here she is just kind of tragic and hot, which is safe. Visually, the movie is so very polished. It's bright and hyper composed and lush. Every frame looks so expensive, but the second you look closer, you realize that most of the credit belongs to Linus Sandgren, who appears to be absurdly good at his job. This man deserves a knighthood. Calling this Fennell's visual strength feels wrong when the cinematographer and the set designer, Susie Davies and Charlotte Durix, is doing the heavy lifting, and half the shots are clearly cribbed from other films anyway. She pulls a lot of direct visual inspiration, and by inspiration I mean near replication, from literally everything else. After a while you start playing spot the reference instead of engaging with the actual scenes. It's pretty, but it's not personal. Same with the costumes. They are so cool. They're so gorgeous. They're completely inaccurate, but they're very cool. Jacqueline Duran knows how to design clothes that make actors look incredible on screen. Normally I wouldn't even care about historical accuracy if the film felt coherent. If the rest worked, I'd be happy to accept the stylization. But when the movie is already hollow, the aesthetic polish just feels like distraction. Like it's trying to convince you that it's deeper than it is. Tonally as well, it never settles. The soundtrack is fine in isolation, but it sounds like it belongs to a completely different movie. Like, pick a movie. Any movie. It would work better in any of those. Charlie XCX popping up over Windswept Yorkshire tragedy is so jarring that it becomes funny. It kind of fits the like erotic melodrama that it is. It does not fit Wuthering Heights. Every time the music kicked in, I felt like the film was like accidentally admitting to what it really wanted to be, which is one big long music video. Structurally, it just drags as well. The first 2/3 are ridiculous and painfully derivative. It borrows heavily from basically every Romeo and Juliet adaptation you've ever seen. There's forbidden love and angry rich people and running through fields. We get it. There is no character study and no escalation and no sense of stakes, and it's just repetition all the time. By the time the third act shows up and it tries to get messy and tragic, it is too late. Nothing has been built properly, so the collapse feels weightless, which is wild considering how much narrative weight the original text carries. What really frustrates me is that there were interesting directions Fennell could have taken. The conflation of sex and death, the body horror of obsession, the claustrophobia of inheritance. You could push this into like genuinely uncomfortable territory. You could make it feral and sweaty and mean if you want. You could lean into gothic instead of just, dressing up like it, and even then, hardly. Instead, everything gets smoothed into something marketable. We've had some really strong gothic movies lately, like Nosferatu and Frankenstein, and maybe the Batman, depending on what you consider gothic. Stuff that understands mood and moral rot and atmosphere. This does not belong in that conversation. The most damning thing, even setting aside the whitewashing and the political flattening and the thematic erasure, is that it's still just nothing. It's not risky and it's not bold. It's not particularly romantic. It's not disturbing. It's not even especially memorable. It's just there. It's just 2 hours of like Pinterest aesthetic. I kept waiting for it to justify itself, for one scene to like actually commit to the bit, for one moment to feel like a little bit dangerous, a little bit freaky. It never happens. By the end, when Catherine dies, the movie just stops, because of course it does. It feels less like a tragic conclusion and more like they just kind of gave up. Cutting the second generation means cutting the book's whole point. There is no reckoning and no consequence. There's no like hope there. Just like spectacle and then credits, which I think kind of sums up the whole experience. It looks good. It sounds fine. Two attractive people kissing and whatnot. And underneath that, there is nothing. Here's the thing. If Emerald Fennell threatens to release another movie, I will be there. Oh, I will be sat. Invite me. I'll change my review immediately if I get free tickets to the next one. I don't want to pay for this anymore.